Everyone, welcome back to another edition of Dojo Live. This is Tulio Sirgusa broadcasting from Southern California. Today is Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. Joining me are Carlos Ponce in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you.
This is our
It's good to be
second
here.
episode this week, and we are talking with Andres Blank, who is the CTO and co-founder at Fetcher, and we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite topic, recruiting. Especially in today's time, it's become more and more challenging because there's such a demand for talent, but they're hiding. They're hiding under a rock somewhere. So, anyway, we're going to be talking about recruiting. Welcome to the show, Andres. But before we go into the topic of conversation and dig right in there and learn all that we can, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing, and thanks so much for having me, Carlos, Kim, and Tulio. And hi, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to spend some time with me today. So, as mentioned, I'm Andres Blank. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fetcher. I am originally from Venezuela. My background, I've been always very passionate about the technology space. I learned how to program when I was pretty young, and fell in love with the internet as it was coming out, and built a few websites in Latin America, some companies that were actually kind of successful. And then as the situation in Minnesota started getting a little bit bad, I decided to move to the US. I did an MBA at MIT. And from there, I started my first consumer technology company in the US. It was called Pixable. It was in the photo, social, and mobile space. And we were able to grow the user base and the business really quickly. And the company got acquired in a couple of years, and it was a really great acquisition for us. And from there, I was able to bring in a few people that I worked with in the past, and we started working on Fetcher. We've been working with Fetcher for the last 5 years, and it's been a really exciting ride. You know, a lot of highs and lows. And definitely some great lessons that hopefully I will be able to use as we continue growing the business.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. Tell us about Fetcher. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so Fetcher really helps hiring mostly what you would call a knowledge worker. So it's people who are mostly in front of a computer doing any type of work. And when it comes to hiring knowledge workers, something that we realized, and I realized this when I was building my own business, and then when we got acquired, the larger business as well went through the same thing, but that the best people usually are not applying to your job post. The best people are usually in other companies, but open to new opportunities. And the problem is that finding these people and getting them excited about your opportunity is a very time-consuming process. I'm sure that most of you here have used LinkedIn in the past, and that's what recruiters usually use, right? They'll go on LinkedIn, they'll do some searches, they'll find some relevant people, they'll send a lot of messages to be able to get people interested. When you're reaching out to these type of people, it's called passive talent. It's a very time-consuming process. And what we did at Fetcher is that we said, hey, can we automate this process? And when we were thinking about automating this, there was a lot of new technology in the artificial intelligence space that was available to the public. So we started using a lot of that technology. And our insight, and kind of like maybe our unique insight, is that we realized that in order to really automate this process, AI wasn't enough. What we did is that we combined AI with people looking at the data and training the data. And once we did that, we were able to really automate this process. So we released in 2017. And pretty much since then, we've seen a lot of success. We've worked with over 1,000 companies at this point. Some of the larger companies that we work with include Amazon and SpaceX. But we also work with a lot of smaller companies as well. So it's been really exciting to be able to help big companies, especially smaller companies. It's great because smaller companies are usually the ones who don't have the resources to really go and hire at scale. So Fetcher is really being able to bring that to every type of company, no matter the size, at a pretty decent cost for the company.
Nice. I want to learn more about your human to machine interface. But before we do, let's go right into introducing the topic today.
Yep,
Carlos.
absolutely. I hope I'm not on mute. I'm not on mute, right?
No,
Nope.
you're good.
Good, good.
Miraculously.
Miraculously. Yeah. Okay, that's a winner. Okay, so yeah, today we're going to be speaking about, we're going to be answering a question, as a matter of fact. The question is, how has recruiting changed during COVID? So that's precisely what the topic is about. The topic is chosen by our guest today is how recruiting has changed during COVID. So we're going to be discussing how effective recruiting across the board has always been challenging, particularly when assembling a rocking team. So this is exactly what we're going to be discussing. So let's start with that as a first question. Andres, tell us a little bit about why you chose this particular topic and why did you feel it was relevant for today's day and age? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was really interesting is that, when COVID, in February 2020, we already were seeing a lot of appetite from small companies to big companies to automate more of their processes. But, we were coming from a place where recruiting hadn't really changed. Like there hadn't been any really outside macro things happen to recruiting in years, right? So we were seeing that this change towards automation was happening at a pretty decent pace. But then when COVID hit, like initially what happened is that everybody stopped hiring. So it was definitely like a very tough time for companies like ours. And, we weren't alone, like any company in our space for the first 3 months. It was really in a tough situation because our existing clients didn't know if they were going to hire or not hire. And that put us in a really tough situation. And then we were kind of like in a little bit of a holding pattern. And then what we saw unfold pretty much in the last year, right? So from July, August 2020 till now, is probably the biggest change that I've seen in hiring, at least since I've been hiring people myself, right? And I think that people are still trying to figure out, like how to build a business now, right? Like now that recruiting has changed. So I thought it was a really proper topic to put into the table to the audience and just explain, at least from a perspective of a company that offers recruiting software, what has changed in the ecosystem. And it's definitely been a lot of big changes since then.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Andres, for elaborating. So, Tulio, you were going to say something?
Yeah. So earlier you said something interesting that what most companies really looking for are the passive candidates that are not necessarily actively looking for an opportunity. Let's just create a persona, right? Someone's been with a company 4 years, fairly successful. They're obviously doing well there. They've been there for a while. The company's growing. There's traction that shows every indication that this could be a person that would be interested in potentially move. Maybe they haven't had a promotion in several years, like their LinkedIn profile hasn't been updated with a promotion for several years. So they're kind of itching for change, maybe itching for an opportunity. How does the platform go and identify these individuals that have not raised their hand to say, hey, I'm looking? How do you determine that? Are there factors that help you guys determine that?
Yeah, no, there's definitely like a lot of signals, as you can imagine, when you're hiring, right? Like the most obvious one is really like you get a job description from the company that's looking to hire, and that really is the blueprint of like what are the typical things that you're looking for, right? So the obvious thing to do is to first look at like what is the job title, how much experience does this person need to have, what are like real skills that this person needs to have. Like if it's a programmer, it could be a programming language. If it's a manager, it could be managing X amount of people. It could also be specific to an industry. And so then like once you start figuring out like what is the job title, what is the seniority, what are the skills, what we'll do is that we'll start understanding like who is the company that's actually hiring. Is it a smaller company? If it's a larger company, in what space are they, right? So then like what our technology will do is that like, let's say that you're hiring a program, right? So there's a lot of technical terms that you can use here, but let's say you're saying, I'm trying to hire a front-end engineer. What our tool will allow us to do is say, oh, a front-end engineer, here are 25 job titles that relate to a front-end engineer. So what our technology, the first thing that it's going to do is understand what are the most important keywords that our algorithm should be looking for, right? Then the second thing it's going to do is understand like what are the type of companies that it should be targeting. So like we can go, like when you get a job description, you can go from saying, hey, in this job description, there are like 15 and 20 points that are very important. Once it goes through our own algorithm, it will go from 20 keywords to hundreds of keywords. It's going to figure out these are the companies that you should target. Here are all the job titles. Here are all the different skills. And then what Fetcher does is that we have a very large database that has over 300 million profiles. At the same time, we'll leverage other platforms like LinkedIn, GitHub, Stack Overflow, Dribble for the sign. So what we're trying to do is really look at the whole universe of the online world to find people. Mm-hmm. And then like once we have identified the first group of people, that's when it goes through our layer of quality assurance, in which you're going to have people in our team looking at all the information and just seeing if that person is matching. And that's when they start training the data. And that's when they say this person's a good fit, this person's a bad fit. And after we start training the data, the algorithm in the background is going to change and it's going to adapt. And once we feel that the quality of the profiles that we have is good, that's when we send that information to our existing clients. And a lot of our existing clients, like once they calibrate it, once they get a few profiles and they say, oh, these people look like super relevant, then they'll automate it. So then without even looking, they will blindly email hundreds of people. And what's really neat is that those emails actually go on behalf of the company, right? So if you work at Amazon, the person sending you an email is not Fetcher, but it's Amazon, right? And if that person doesn't respond, our technology will follow up and send 2 follow-ups. So what's really neat is that we were able to not only find really good people, but create like a very clean mechanism to reaching out to them and following up. And the other thing that's really great is that once people respond, our algorithm can detect if that person's actually interested or not. And if somebody's interested, we're going to highlight that person to make sure that you're staying on top of that. So that's a little bit like how the search aspect works. And the reality is that going back to the passive talent, like what signals are we looking for? So that's like the part that is really obvious, right? Like you're trying to look for these keywords. But going back to what Turi was saying, like, has this person been promoted recently? Is this company growing? So we take those signals a lot into account, like how long has this person been in the company? Is this company doing well? Is this company kind of like flat? So that not only allows us to find people who are great, but people who seem to be highly likely to look for a new opportunity. But even with those, yes, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, one of these elements, I think, whenever you're searching for an individual, particularly somebody who's not looking for you actively, right? This poaching element, which can rub some people wrong sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think one of the keys to breaking through that is personalizing. So once these people have been identified and you kind of use this AI to make a good match, can it go beyond that? Like, can you also personalize or at least choose the best messaging that person might best identify with? Or is that where it leads more into the recruiter's job?
That's a great question, Kim. So something that we realize is that if you send, so the emails that we send are somewhat personalized. So what does that mean? It means that when you get an email, it's going to mention what is your name, what is your job title, what company you came from. So it looks kind of like a personalized email. It's like, hi, Kim, I'm Andres. I'm the founder of Fetcher. We do this. I noticed that you are a front-end engineer at Amazon, and we love your background, and we would love to chat. We also give the option, and we display so much information that if you want to personalize it even further, you can do that. You can grab each email and personalize. But something that we realized is that if you're contacting people who are very relevant for an opportunity, you don't necessarily need to talk about, oh, like we both love the Yankees, or, you know, like, oh, I noticed that you posted a photo of a hot dog. Like, I love hot dogs. So, like, I think that those things become not that important if you're reaching out to the right people. What really rubs people off the wrong way, because I agree, like we work with so many companies that we've seen it all, is that if you're emailing somebody about an opportunity that has nothing to do with your skills, which happens very often in the LinkedIn world.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, like you'll see like the CEO of Shopify putting on Twitter, like somebody offering him a job to be an engineer at a company, right? So that's definitely something that for us.
Those are my favorites. Those are my favorite emails.
We've seen former Nearsoft CEO Roberto Martinez being approached by headhunters and and the like. You know, if we just stories that he told about how these things go in the wrong direction. So yeah, we totally hear you. Yeah. So I got a question here myself. If I'd like to step in, Kim, Tulio. So we're discussing building, among other things, of course, we're discussing how COVID has affected the world of recruiting, and we're having to adapt. So Andres, my question is, in this adaptation process to all the changes that COVID brought about, including digital transformation for a lot of companies, what would you say that the role of let me put it this way. How far do you think we should stretch the use of technology as it pertains to, for example, implementing it in a way that could even mimic or even resemble human behavior? I'm talking about, for example, conversational AI assistants to filter out maybe specific profiles that are not a fit and these kinds of things. So how far do you think we should stretch it? How do you balance things out in a way that you have the tech component and also the human side of the equation nicely balanced to effectively have a fair recruiting scenario for across the board? How would you say this can be overseen?
Yeah. So, you know, that when we're selling Fetcher, like what we usually say is like, look, like most people that decide to become a recruiter, the reason why they want it to be a recruiter is because they love people. They love interacting with people. They love getting them excited about a job opportunity. They want to talk to their teammates and figure out who is the best person for their job. That's really what it is. And, you know, like if you go back 50 years, like recruiters, they create real relationships with potential candidates, with their company. And that kind of disappeared with technology. Like now that LinkedIn is available, like most recruiters have become almost like database programmers. They're just like doing all these searches and sending all these messages. So what's really interesting is that, you know, technology from one side has allowed you to have access to a lot of information, but from another side, it's allowed you to have less of that human aspect of it. So when we think about what we do, like what we want to do is really help you do all these repetitive parts of the work. So you can really focus on that human connection, because when you're trying to hire somebody, like, you know, the candidate wants to see a person, right? They want to have a real conversation. And the recruiter who's making a decision as well wants to be able to make that decision by themselves. So I would say that, like the way that we talk about Fetcher, and this is for a very particular area, which is that knowledge workers world where there is volume, but it's not insane like it could be when you're trying to hire warehouse workers, and it's a little bit different. I'll talk about that in a second. But in those cases, what we're trying to do is tell people, hey, we're going to get your calendar filled with meetings. That's what we're going to do. All you have to do now is be yourself and have enough time to be thoughtful and create connection. So I would say that, and this goes back to a little bit to what Kim says. It's like, yes, like from one side, Fetcher is not going to allow you to say, hey, I saw you posted a hot dog on Instagram, but we're going to allow you to have much more conversations than you originally had.
It's this Uber filter that then allows you to do what you do best.
Yeah. And then, but you know, on the other side, you have the knowledge worker, you have the warehouse worker. So like, imagine that you need to hire like 1,000. Like we've worked with companies that need to hire for a call center and need to hire like hundreds of people a month. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, and that's where things like chatbots or these video interviewing processes, which is the first step, is you're literally talking to a computer. That's when I believe that can be effective, because recruiters are so overwhelmed. And the reality is that there's a lot of information that is not online that those chatbots can help. But chatbots are not very effective in general. Like, I would say they're good for customer service when you know what you're looking for. But if you're doing like a very open-ended conversation, it can be dangerous, right? So I think going back, like, there's a company called HireVue. Like, HireVue does these video interviewing things, and then they're kind of like giving people some scores. And you can argue that sometimes it's not perfect, but it's definitely helping people like filter through hundreds of people. So I would say for the case of Fetcher, like having that you want those conversations to be person to person, but when you're doing a higher volume, you might need to resort to those type of things.
Going back to the higher volume, if I understood correctly at the beginning of today's talk, you mentioned that you have a human filter after your artificial intelligence filter. So this sort of human quality control. What's your workforce look like? Like, how many people are required for you to kind of go through all of this, and just your AI training crew? Like, talk more about that. I'm really interested as to what that looks like and how that functions.
Yeah, so to give you perspective, we're working with like hundreds of companies, and we have like 120 people on the data side from our end. And the way that we think about our technology is that we want the humans that we have looking at the data to be way more productive than a normal recruiter would be if they're doing the search by themselves. So the way that we calculate this is like how many qualified leads somebody can find versus like if you were doing this by just going on LinkedIn by yourself. So at this point, the output that a person can do with Fetcher is like double to triple, depending on the complexity of the search. Our big goal, as we do more and more and more searches, is that we're going to be able to reuse a lot of this data that's already been quality controlled by humans across different searches in the future. But that requires for us to not to work with 1,000 companies. It requires us to work with 10,000 companies or even more. So, it is a data acquisition game. And, we're not the first one to think about this idea. Like, if you think about Stitch Fix does something very similar for styling. Like, they have a lot of AI that's going to determine that these are really good pants, but they have a stylist at the end determining like, oh, this is putting like a touch of some subjectivity touch, right? And then the way that they scale is that they use that data to say, oh, Tulio actually looks a lot like Carlos. So we can actually, at least when it comes to choosing pants, they have very similar tastes, right? So that's kind of like the way that we think about how do this eventually scales, because that's a big question, especially when you're building software and trying to work with a lot of companies.
All right. So let's see if I got this right. Back in the day, before technology, recruiting was a very personalized relationship with the candidate. In fact, I heard Nathan. I mean, it used to be the kind of thing where you would work with a candidate for their entire career. I heard of guys that would get placed every 2-3 years. They had to deal with their recruiter. They just worked it out, right? That's a very personalized relationship. And when the recruiter spoke to those companies, they knew them very well because they've been working with them for 10, 20 years. Technology changed all that and made it very impersonal to the point where now it became like recruiters became gatekeepers. And instead of having that cherished, personalized relationship, it became a love-hate relationship. Let's just call it what it is. Okay. So now what I'm hearing is this technology is bringing back the personalization by actually having not just machines doing all the sifting, but there's people that are actually involved in this process. So you kind of get a concierge approach to it. What I want to understand, who the customer is. Who is your customer? Is it the company leveraging this technology? Is it the individual working with this technology to find the next role? Both? How are you determining who the customer is and why?
Yeah, so usually like 85% of our clients are companies, and they're not staffing firms. 15% of our companies are staffing firms. So we do work with staffing firms. But I would say that like where we have most of our business isn't with companies directly. Most of them are located in the US is probably 80%, and 20%, the other 20% is a mix of Latin America and Europe. And what I would say is that like we're usually working with recruiters. So it's people in the talent that have like a talent acquisition title. We do work with a lot of hiring managers as well. So in some cases, even with larger companies, you'll have a hiring manager that they haven't been able to hire for a role, and they take matters to themselves. And then, when we were working with smaller companies, like when you're saying like sub 50 people, there are many cases where these companies, they don't have a recruiting team. So in that case, we'll work directly with a hiring manager. And what's great about Fetcher is that when we started, we were mostly working with very small companies. And then we've been able to graduate and work with bigger and bigger companies, as I was mentioning before. So what's really great is that you don't have to be a recruiter to use Fetcher really well, right? And that's very different from LinkedIn, right? Like you usually need to spend so much time on LinkedIn that if you're not a recruiter, you're not going to be able to do that. So, recruiters, US companies, I would say like most of our clients are between 100 employees to 5,000 employees, so pretty broad. But in the last 6 months, and this will come as we speak more about how COVID has impacted hiring. Mm-hmm. In the last 6 months, we were just seeing like a lot of larger companies coming into the fold.
Why is that, do you think, that the larger company, I see the value for a smaller company, tremendous value, getting capacity they normally would have to spend a lot of money for. Big companies usually have this kind of capacity, but why are they coming in now? Are they needing more personalization because it's harder to find people? What's driving that change?
Yeah, like when we started, like I thought exactly as you, like, oh, these large companies, they have so many recruiters, like why would they need us? But the reality is that usually recruiting teams, even in larger companies, in proportion to the rest of the company, is kind of smaller. So what's happening is, even the larger companies, they'll work with staffing firms. And the last thing that a company wants to do is work with a staffing firm because they're prohibitively expensive. So, I get surprised when I speak to a large company. They're like, oh, we spend maybe, let's say, like $1 million on recruiting software. And then you say, like, how much you spend on staffing, and it can be 10 times that or even more. So when you talk to these companies, they want to be able to not rely so much on staff. And why do they work with staffing firms? Because these staffing firms, they're sending a lot of emails themselves. So they're kind of like leveraging that. And the reason why there's more adoption happening now than I would say 6 months ago is because of COVID, there was a moment of pause in which even the larger companies had a moment to, some of them downsize their team. Some of them decided to rethink their processes. And more importantly, it was a moment of where automation started to become an important word that started to become more and more streamlined. The other thing that happened is that, a lot of things changed. So, like a lot of even larger companies, they not necessarily need to require to hire people who are local. So now, like all these relationships that they had with staffing firms become irrelevant, right? So, so now they need to find another way to attract all this talent. So, it's a mix of a lot of different things that has made the enterprise to start looking more and more towards automating, which is exciting.
So we've come to the end of today's show. This 30 minutes has.
We could talk for hours on this.
Yeah. I have one final question. It's in line with COVID, but the shift goes more from the technology to the people themselves. What have you seen, if you have any data to back this up, about the shift and what's attractive to those passive workers? Is it money that's talking? Is it the ability to work remotely? Like, how are people successfully recruiting and attracting these passive workers? And tapping into that company culture, what would you say is attractive about Fetcher's own company culture that's making you successful?
Yeah. Like at the end of the day, we're humans, right? And what's really impressive about the current workforce is that, the way that 20-year-olds prioritize their career is very different to how 20-year-olds would prioritize their career 20 years ago, and very different towards like how an 50-year-old executive would prioritize their career now. So what I would say is that, like different companies can look for different things. What I would say that is becoming much more important is like, how do they think about inclusivity? So like we do a lot of work. Like that's another reason why we do a lot of work with larger companies, because they're looking to hire more diverse candidates, and that's really time consuming. So we help a lot on that. So like looking for more of an inclusive workspace is important. Looking for a place where there's, now people really value flexibility. So this idea, and it's still up to the debate, like, do I want to work from an office? Do I don't want to work from an office? So having a little bit of that hybrid is important. Compensation is important, but what I'll be surprised, especially with the younger generation, is that purpose defeats compensation, which is something that blows my mind. And it's something that we think a lot about Fetcher. Like one of the great things about Fetcher is that even though we are working with a lot of US-based companies, the people that we're hiring are not located in the US, are in Venezuela, are in the Philippines, they're in Colombia. So what's been really exciting is that being able to bring people from different cultures and give them opportunity. So that even for the talent that we do hire in the US, like that's really exciting for them to have such a diverse workspace. And going back to the purpose, like the way that we like something like, how do we show that Fetcher is actually something that adds value? It's around the people that we hire. So we have like a big wall that shows all the photos of the people that are getting hired, and you're humanizing what you're doing. And there's one of the biggest things that you can help a company do is find people for a job. So if that's part of your purpose, it really means a lot. So the way that we count success is like, how many interested candidates have we found this month? So we're like, oh wow, this month we enabled, I think it was like 30,000 interested candidates. So like we're really creating a lot of serendipity. So that's a little bit how we think about purpose. But yeah, it's important to be dynamic. That's what I would say for companies now. Like you have to be dynamic. Like things are changing really fast. And when you think about diversity, you also have to think about diversity, not at the entry level, but also at a very senior level as well. Because if not, you won't be able to really achieve true diversity.
Very valid point.
Love it. That's purpose overrides income compensation. I love that. Now all we need to do is train most.
I would say we could have the best
what
of both
purpose
worlds,
means.
however.
Yeah, I mean ideally, but I think some companies need to be trained on what purpose means. It's not driving profits. That's not what they talk about when they talk about purpose. So anyway, it's been a pleasure to have you. We're up on time, Andres. This looks like a great tool. We ought to consider looking at this. It looks like you do a lot of work in Latin America, so that will be of interest to us. So great to have you as our guest. We'll have to check in later to see some additional use cases from you. Thanks for being with us. Carlos, we got one more show tomorrow? No, two more shows, right?
No, actually, yeah, we have two more shows. Actually, tomorrow we're going to be speaking with John Honchariu, the CEO and founder of Companion.com. The topic, AI, animals, and empathy. That's cool. Then, of course, there's the Thursday interview with Aaron Guyette, the CEO at Pedestal.com, and the topic, why you will fail and what you can do to stop it. So those are the two remaining conversations we're having right here on Dojo Live at 12 p.m. Pacific tomorrow and Thursday. So stay with us and be safe.
Bring your pet tomorrow. Bring your pet to the show, guys. Let's bring our pets to the show.
Absolutely.
See you soon.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.